Welcome back to the Talking Hedge. I'm Josh Kincaid, and this is your Cannabis Business Podcast. Today, we are here live at the World Trade Center for a multi-state operator panel. Today, my guests include Wes Abney, Justin Ruiz, Jerry Derevyanny, and Kacey Morrissey. Wes is the mad genius behind the Northwest Leaf, a cannabis magazine prioritizing the patient's voice. Co-founded in Seattle in 2010, they celebrated their 100th issue last October, and they'll celebrate their 9th anniversary next month in June. Northwest Leaf, Oregon Leaf, and Alaska Leaf are monthly magazines that cover cannabis from every angle. The magazine has been a leader in providing high-quality journalism, photography, and a web hub for both the recreational and medicinal marijuana community. In July of 2014, Wes expanded with the Oregon Leaf, and in 2016 launched Alaska Leaf, then recently expanded to the East Coast with the Maryland Leaf. Wes is also the co-host of the Leaf Life podcast, as well as a cannabis producer-processor in Washington, Alaska, Oregon, and Nevada, with access to over 1,000-store distribution channel, making cannabis-infused edibles called Leafchews and a medical version called Leafchews. Next up is Justin Ruiz, owner of Hypeherbally Cannabis Shop. Justin has been heavily involved in the cannabis space since 1999 when he got involved with HempFest, first as a fellow protester, and then he began supporting the event through vending in 2007. In 2011, Justin established Hypeherbally, a medical marijuana dispensary, recently reopened as a 21 and over licensed cannabis rec shop. Justin is proud to have helped pioneer the Washington cannabis industry as we know it today, and has been busy creating a lifestyle brand around Hypeherbally, named #1 name in Washington State by the Seattle Times. Last year, Justin and Wes launched a shuttle tour service together called Higher Than a Space Shuttle. Justin, thanks for coming on board. From New York commercial litigator to general counsel of the largest recreational company in Washington State, Jerry Derevyanny is the executive vice president of corporate development and director of Cannex Capital Group. Cannex was founded in 2017 and is managed by a team of experienced industry and capital markets experts who are committed to aggressive, cost-effective growth. Cannex facilitates growth through cash flow from operations, strategic acquisitions, partnerships, and by leveraging the expertise of its experienced operational team. Cannex provides a range of comprehensive and flexible growth options for licensed cannabis cultivators, processors, and or rec shops domestically and internationally, including providing turnkey real estate with operational infrastructure as well as long-term advisory and consulting services. Cannex is a publicly traded company listed on the Canadian Securities Exchange under the symbol CNNX. And remotely, today we have Kacey Morrissey with us. She's the Director of Industry Analytics at New Frontier Data. Educated as an engineer with experience in institutional asset management, Morrissey brings a unique blend of technical analytical abilities, intuitive market awareness, and a high-level understanding of institutional risk management to the cannabis industry. Since joining New Frontier Data in 2015, she's developed economic models to produce some of the most accurate and widely quoted industry market projections in the legal cannabis industry, as well as produce the first preliminary analysis of global cannabis demand. Prior to joining New Frontier, Morrissey was a senior investment analyst at the Hershey Trust Company, where she was responsible for public and private equity investment, due diligence, and analysis for the Trust's $12 billion investment portfolio. Today's multi-state operator panel is hosted at the World Trade Center. The World Trade Center in Tacoma grows trade and investment by providing direct access to the largest business network in the world with 300 offices in 99 countries. The World Trade Center in Tacoma is the lone trade service for the Pacific Northwest. The seminars, award ceremonies, and conferences can generate contacts and contracts. Trade research can clarify opportunities, and their matchmaking can turn those opportunities into trade. The e-commerce export store has partnered with Alibaba and is translated into 18 languages with about 40,000 unique visitors every month, giving your product an opportunity to be seen globally. Wes, you also just expanded to Maryland, and Maryland regulations allow companies to own no more than one license in each of the state's 3 categories: growing, processing, and selling. And a new law imposed a moratorium on sales for at least another year, in part to avoid the type of consolidation that companies are trying to execute. So do you think that state residency requirements will affect investment or small business growth in Maryland like we saw in Washington?
That's a really great question, Josh. And honestly, I think that the residency requirements are a double-edged sword. And whether it's Maryland or any other state. Another great example of that is Alaska, where Alaska really set out to make the licenses worthless in the sense of anyone who wants a license can get one, so the piece of paper doesn't have an intrinsic value like it does in other states with caps. And then they have very severe out-of-state limitations that basically say if you're not a state resident, you're not getting in. And so you look at states like Maryland and Alaska or even Washington that's really limited that out-of-state investment. And in some ways it's worked and in some ways it hasn't. People in pot are creative, especially the ones that are from the old school. We had to be creative when we sold pot when it was illegal. We had to be creative when we sold pot when it was in the gray market. And you better believe that people with money will get creative in how to funnel it into these businesses and acquire ownership, whether it's through creative licensing deals, creative consulting deals, or however else people are getting around it. I personally like the intention of laws that keep closed markets in this states' rights experiment scheme of things. But I also would say that, over the 9 years that I've been publishing pot magazines and seeing the industry develop, that it hasn't really worked in the way that it was intended to, which was to create small mom and pop type markets. No matter what, this is a very valuable commodity in a market that's going to potentially be worth hundreds of billions of dollars annually. So is it really working to limit licenses? I would say no. And I don't know if that's the correct direction for new legislatures and new markets to go to. Ultimately, I think that this is heading towards scale and heading towards companies that can produce it competitively. And whether those companies are local or non-local or potentially international, I think we're going to see this end up just like a regular commodity where, there's no question of, hey, are you a resident? If you want to open a restaurant or a bar or a hotel, it's a matter of, hey, do you have the permits? Do you have the licensing? Do you have the capital to make this project work? And so again, perhaps states like Alaska will remain only, Alaska-owned businesses until the day it goes federally legal. I have seen personally in Maryland that has not worked. And then interestingly enough, you have some of Maryland's largest players have sued the state to stop the issuing of more licenses, which has created controversy, especially because those licenses were earmarked to go to minorities or people who were adversely affected by the drug war. And so in that scenario, you have, some highly capitalized companies that have invested $10 to $20 million into their projects, turning around and suing to stop people who don't have that kind of resources from getting these licenses. And so when we talk local versus non-local, big money versus small money, I hate to say this on a certain level, but it just is the way that this is going. It's the direction it's going. And so we need to think pragmatically about the industry and what we really want for it, and how we best achieve that. And like Justin said earlier, it's kind of that blend of people who've been in this for a very long time, who made the sacrifices to put this here. And then you have the really big businesses who are simply, positioned well to do this, just as they would be if it was any other product or project.
So without addressing like Maryland or any state specifically, I think it's worthwhile to step back and look at, okay, why did these residency requirements exist in a lot of places initially? So in Washington, what was people forget why. It wasn't about anything other than the Cole memo. They were so scared of federal, interference, federal enforcement, that they wanted to just kind of keep it as contained as possible. And back in the old days, if you listen to some of the OG kind of regulators, they'll tell you that the FBI initially told them, we don't know if we can run background checks on out-of-staters. So you need to be in state only, which means you got to go to the Washington State Patrol. So that was one of the big reasons, right? And then I get what people are trying to do with the residency limitations, but I think it's counterproductive. You got to think about like who will be the beneficiary of that. It's going to be the guy that was already rich in that local area, right? That's where it's going to go. And then the less capital that there is to be able to buy a business, the less worth that business has, and the less opportunity to expand that business has. So the most unfortunate reality is that some really good operators that are a little undercapitalized they're just going to starve. And that's, I think, maybe something that's going on in Washington, which is really unfortunate. But I think that those have there are other ways of doing what they're trying to do potentially. And maybe even some of the consolidation risks are misplaced, because in a lot of ways, the most compliant players are going to be the ones with the most at stake, right? So potentially. So I wouldn't be as worried about the consolidation. And I think it bears mentioning that you don't have this in pretty much any other industry I'm familiar with, because it's probably unconstitutional to discriminate against out-of-state residents, and even other super highly regulated industries like gambling. You can have out-of-state ownership. You can have foreign ownership. In gambling, it's really interesting. As I understand, I'm certainly no expert. So if you want to own a casino, like in Washington, they're going to investigate you, and you're going to pay for them to investigate you. If you live in Macau, you're going to pay for the investigator to come out, interview you, go through other stuff, but it's legal. And if you go through that process, then it's fine. And I think, doesn't that address everything they're looking for? Making sure that the mafia and or the cartels aren't getting into it, making sure you have legitimate players that are incentivized to follow the rules within that state. Right.
So Kacey, as a follow-up question, do you think that limiting investors in Maryland will be good for small businesses and growth?
Well, I definitely agree with the double-edged sword comment. On one hand, if you're limiting external investment, you're giving the opportunity to those smaller businesses, but this is also limiting those with potentially greater expertise. So in new state markets, like Maryland, where there could be lower technical sophistication or experience, you do end up with the risk that, applicants who are awarded licenses may not be the best suited and could materialize in the form of, product quality issues, supply shortages, et cetera. And then, plus these experienced stakeholders tend to bring in outside, or less experienced stakeholders will tend to bring in this outside expertise anyway, leading to capital flight out of that state market in other forms. And, additionally, limiting that outside investment can be a hindrance for local stakeholders who may not have access to those well-capitalized partners. So this becomes acutely important because, these businesses don't have recourse. They can't go to a bank or traditional institutions. So, if their access to private capital is limited, there can be sort of an unintended restrictive effect on their own expansion. And this is especially important in the initial years of the program when the regulatory disruptions and supply issues can occur.
And with that, we're out of time. I want to thank my guests for coming on. Jerry with Cannex Capital Group and Forefront. Thank you. I want to thank Wes Abney of the Northwest Leaf and Leafchews. Justin, I appreciate you coming out. He's with Hypeherbally. Also, him and Wes joined up for the Higher Than a Space Shuttle. And Kacey with New Frontier Data, I appreciate you being on the line with us today.
Thanks so much.
All right, talk to you later. Bye. Bye, Kacey. So with that, we're going to roll this one up. I'm Josh Kincaid. This is a Talking Hedge. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or don't. And I'm out.